Hi. There are so many things left in the back of my mind in regards to the Quint, certain aspects of the story, some bits and pieces I always wanted to talk about, but as the manga ended a year ago, I was kind of reluctant to bring them up since everything was said and done. But I got some time on my hands and I figured it would be cool to dedicate a video for each Quint and sort of dive more into their characters. So we shall see how it goes, and today let's focus on Yotsuba. This will not be a character analysis per se, as I will not break down everything about Yotsuba's character, but I want to talk about her romantic development and really explain that because a lot of people confuse it with romantic moments or more intimate interactions between her and Futaro. I want to talk about the nature of her inner guilt and especially about her duality. Now, what I mean by that? On the surface, Yotsuba is portrayed as a dumb-ish person, happy-go-lucky type, goes hand in hand with the role of comedic relief, but she's also hiding quite a capable persona, unfortunately shrouded in guilt and sorrow. This duality often puts her between the devil and the deep blue sea, how they say, right? Between two equally troublesome choices. If she takes advantage of the fact that she knows Futaro and makes moves on him, she would feel guilty towards her sisters who also like him. But if she pushes him away, that would eat her alive. And this made a lot of people, myself included of course, view her as a selfless person when it came to her sisters. Something that Negi also implies quite a lot throughout the series, and it seems to be something collectively agreed upon in the community. I supported the idea that Yotsuba is a selfless person many times when I talked about her character, which is exactly why I also mentioned on as many occasions that her actions contradict her conviction. But what if I told you that Yotsuba is every little bit selfless as she is selfish? Would you close the video right now and drop a dislike? Or would you join me and listen to what I have to say? If you're still here, before I go any further, I have to say that this isn't going to be a negative video. I'm not here to trash Yotsuba for any reason, for God's sake she gets enough of that on a daily basis. I know some people are more sensible when it comes to their favorite Quint, but please understand that I just want to discuss my thoughts and view on this aspect of her character. I do not hate Yotsuba, I am not mad that she won, it's the writing that I'm not a fan of and it's the writing I'm going to discuss here. With that out of the way, let's have a look at the Bell Kisser situation to start with. We're going to talk about other events later, but this one sticks out like a sore thumb. So, the Bell Kisser was officially revealed to be Yotsuba in the last chapter of the manga, that's 122. You guys know my thoughts on the Bell Kisser's identity, I still stand by that, but I'm not going to be redundant, so let's just leave my take aside. Yotsuba kissed Futaro under the bell. Interestingly enough, she did it even though she said she was going to fully support her sisters. She was not going to take advantage of the fact that she knew him from childhood, she was going to prioritize her sister's happiness. In other words, Yotsuba wasn't going to make any kind of move on Futaro. Kissing him under the bell is a rather selfish action, wouldn't you say? Now, before I throw accusations, why don't we break down this situation and try to understand what had actually happened? Why did she kiss him? What led her to do that? What's the truth here? There seem to be three scenarios that would justify her actions and are sort of the most commonly believed in the community. The first one would be an accident, the second a goodbye kiss, and the third a way of pushing Futaro into thinking more seriously about the Quints on a romantic level. In other words, helping her sisters. So let's discuss them individually. First, how likely is it that it was an accidental kiss? Actually, we get a pretty clear picture in chapter 122 when Yotsuba and Futaro briefly discuss the bell kiss. When it's about time for them to seal the vows with a kiss, Yotsuba tells Futaro to recall that day 5 years ago, referring to the bell kiss as it's revealed on this page after the wedding concluded. Yotsuba is very aware of it, seems kind of proud and expects Futaro to remember that moment, suggesting intention from Yotsuba. But that's not enough to say the kiss was intentional. On the next page, we jump to a scene with Itsuki and Yotsuba back in the scrambled eggs. They're leaving the place, Yotsuba notices that Futaro is missing and wants to go back to check on him. She's not comfortable doing it under disguise though, but Itsuki assures her that Futaro would recognize her. So, she runs back, gets to Futaro and does this. Now, have a good look at her posture yourselves, look at the whole scene and ask yourselves, what was Yotsuba going to do? Leaning on Futaro, looking at his face with her eyes closed and her lips puckered, trembling from head to toe, I really can't tell. It's as though she wanted to kiss him. She actually went straight for the kiss. Maybe the bell was rung on accident, very likely, but the kiss was on purpose. If you have a different interpretation, feel free to drop it, but it was clearly not an accident to me. So that rules out the first scenario. Next, a goodbye kiss. Well, that's just straight up selfish, isn't it? Especially when you consider that Itsuki told her beforehand that Futaro would recognize her and Yotsuba went straight for the kiss. That opens the possibility that would suggest Yotsuba thought Futaro would know it's her and was said afterwards because he couldn't tell, right? She wasn't necessarily feeling guilty because she kissed him. But I don't have a strong argument for either, so it's your choice. In any case, I know people will come out and say that Yotsuba also deserves happiness. Is she not allowed to do what she wants for once? Look at how people responded to Ichigo being selfish for, once. But I'm not saying that. She should get all the happiness she needs. But stating that she supports her sisters and then kissing Futaro, even if it was a goodbye kiss, it's not selfless. It's selfish. She claims to support her sisters, but when no one's watching, she takes a bite of Futaro. Even if we were to look back on chapter 51, First Spring, when Yotsuba gave Futaro a kiss on the cheek. A few pages before that, the queens talk about how to reward Futaro for his work, without money, and we get a panel where 4 of them think about kissing and Yotsuba about winning, I suppose, implying that she has no idea what her sisters were referring to. Although, shortly after that, Yotsuba kisses him and says it was to thank him for being their tutor, exactly what her sisters were discussing before. So it's pretty clear that Yotsuba was aware of the whole situation, right? And was just playing dumb. Something she does quite a lot, as we can tell from her flashbacks. The way Neki handled her duality is very bizarre, but I'll talk about that a bit later in the video. And I'll also talk a lot more about this selfish side of Yotsuba, so don't worry. It's also kind of odd how in chapter 90 Itsuki tells Yotsuba that everyone has the right to hope for happiness. Essentially, Itsuki tried to support and push Yotsuba to confess to Futaro. Itsuki really supports her from the moment she learned about her past with Futaro, and also presents her with opportunities to fulfill her side of the promise, something Yotsuba really takes for granted, right? Because through Itsuki she had a way to tackle her issues. Negi chose not to use it, but that's another thing. Anyway, Yotsuba denies Itsuki and pretty much says she won't go for it, even though she did quite a lot of moves on Futaro. You guys see what I'm talking about? Yotsuba often claims she doesn't want to do certain things, but does them anyway, and vice versa, either incognito or labeled as innocent mistakes. She's never held accountable for anything, unlike Ichigo, who, even though supported her sisters the most, will forever be remembered as a snake because of one mistake. But why don't we look at the last scenario? Making Futaro conscious of her sister's feelings. I will say that the bell kiss shook Futaro a bit more actually, in a way that he tried to find the queen who kissed him and tried to figure out why it happened. As we know from chapter 102 that Futaro had no idea who it was and was still trying to figure it out. We're told that the bell kisser got him thinking differently, but when everything is said and done, the bell kisser or anything that happened in that arc was not a factor. In any case, someone had already made Futaro consider other people's feelings to a large degree, and that's Nino. After she confessed to him, we see Futaro in chapter 61 being aware of love around him. He starts to notice love even in mundane scenarios, and he's rather scared of this new situation. During that chapter, he talks to Miko about a hypothetical friend that was confessed and doesn't know how to respond, wonder who that could be. So he did start to consider their feelings from that point onwards. In chapter 63, he talks to Itsuki in that bath. Both of them mention how the other 4 queens were acting strangely regarding Futaro. Remember that he was pretty oblivious before. Miku hugging him in chapter 67 adds to it, and then the bell kiss furthers that. It strengthens his view of romance and feelings. But was that what Yotsuba had in mind? I highly doubt it. As I said in the accidental kiss section, Yotsuba specifically told Futaro to recall that day, meaning that she did it for herself, kiss him in her interest and not for her sisters. She wouldn't bring that up if she did it to help her sisters. The bottom line is that Yotsuba kissed Futaro on purpose, essentially contradicting her conviction that she herself strengthened since chapter 33. She kind of backstabbed her sisters while claiming to support them, and they say Ichigo is the snack. Interestingly enough, in chapter 72 there's this rumor going around that the class reps are dating. We have Yotsuba fantasizing about going out with Futaro, and at some point she builds the courage to ask Futaro what he thinks about her, only to get interrupted by Miku and Ichika. You can also say she wanted to ask Futaro about Miku instead, but then there's the second round where she successfully asks him about herself, and that leads into a whole conversation about love and feelings. By the way, something that goes against the idea of a goodbye kiss in regards to the bell kisser. Now, during the same conversation, at the last minute, Yotsuba pushes Miku forward and says she'll support Futaro. From that moment until Miku confesses, she does support Miku. But at the same time, she doesn't let go of Futaro. In chapter 79, when Raiha mentions the girl in the photo, Yotsuba gets all fired up, especially when Raiha also says that he was Futaro's first love. So basically, Yotsuba tried to keep her feelings in check by supporting Miku. Then the festival arc happened and we do not talk about that. We're noting that prior to the festival, Ichika advised Yotsuba to consider what she really wants to do, of course in regards to Futaro. From chapter 96, Yotsuba is back on Futaro's ship. So, really, if you want to say she was selfless and supported her sisters, it only happened from chapter 72 to chapter 86. But that was more like helping Miku to cope with her own inner guilt. And that's what we're going to talk about now, Yotsuba's inner guilt. For half the manga, Yotsuba is portrayed as a goofball, pretty much, right? A Genki type, a really endearing and energetic girl, honestly. But then with her past coming to light, she becomes a tragic character. Now that is completely alright, there's no issue here. The problem is that it turned out Yotsuba was never a happy-go-lucky person. The goofiness was never in her nature. She was just pretending, putting on an act miles ahead of anything Ichika's acting skills could pull. Her altruism was never an act of goodwill, but a huge way to cope with her inner guilt that she placed on herself. She wasn't helping people because she was being selfless. Her Genki side turned out to be a mask, which was never part of her character. You got to remember that prior to transferring schools, Yotsuba was a selfish person, right? She wanted to be special above her sisters, number one. Her sisters were like, yeah, whatever you say, Yotsuba, but she was arrogant and viewed herself as superior to them. After they transferred, right, in high school, the story begins and then we meet her as a Genki character. So this happy-go-lucky act was not Yotsuba, was just that, an act. She said she was going to leave for everyone's sake, but she didn't actually have the time to change herself. Right when that was supposed to happen, she met Futaro again, so she didn't have time to change as Futaro came back into her life and put a stop to that. Each one of the queens had inner conflict, but none 180'd their characters. You could talk about how Nino went from tsundere to dere, but I'll be the first to show you her step-by-step progression. So really, who is Yotsuba? Negi switched too much and too hard between this duality of her, that at the South Genki pole she is a cheerful goofy girl that really loves Futaro but thinks she doesn't deserve him. And at the North depressed pole, she is drowning herself in guilt on the brink of self-destruction, which seems to have taken a heavy toll on her mental health. And at the end, Yotsuba turns out to be on neither side, not even settling in the middle or really anywhere on the spectrum on which she was portrayed. Snap your fingers and poof, Yotsuba is just a regular person who married Futaro. She might as well be Mutsumi at this point. This is, for me, the main reason why I can't empathize with Yotsuba post her flashbacks. What we've seen and been told about her character didn't have a purpose, or Negi didn't know how to handle them and fix Yotsuba's problems. I can't look back at her and think, yeah, Yotsuba came a long way, because she didn't. But let's not go down the rabbit hole and start ranting. Let's talk hints, clues and foreshadowing for a bit. I can't even joke about Yotsuba here because she had it all. She had plenty of hints, some may not be hints but can be seen as hints. She had good foreshadowing, moments that support her on the mystery aspect, she was rocking it. It would be dishonest to claim otherwise. But this isn't a find what's in the box type of mystery. It's about a person, a relationship, a married couple. And so while this duality is interesting from a mystery standpoint, it's also interesting from a romance standpoint, to be honest. On the mystery side, it kind of paid off, on the other side, it did not. Not only the romance, but rather on her character as a whole. However, let's see what was the problem with the romance in Yotsuba's case. Romance in stories or outside stories usually happens in phases. Meeting, realizing, dealing, confessing. Two people meet, they realize they have feelings for each other, they deal with them and finally confess. Of course, I'm really simplifying it, but these are the basics. Now, 4 of the queens, or at least 3 of them, went through these phases in the life story. For example, Nino met Futaro, realized her feelings around 7 goodbyes, then dealt with them throughout the chapters leading to her last exam side, and finally confessed. Yotsuba, on the other hand, met him in the past, realized she loves him in the past, and has been dealing with her feelings for the entire life story. The first 2 phases, arguably the most interesting ones, were cut from Yotsuba. We had some flashbacks, but 4 chapters of the past isn't going to do much. Also, her dealing phase was technically done because she knew she loves Futaro. If it weren't for her sister, she would have confessed to him a long time ago. Also, as a side note, spending a day with someone as a kid doesn't exactly translate into mad love over the years. Right is not exactly the most believable thing. So she basically didn't have build up, as in the life story she was pretty much fighting whether to confess or not. You look at her sisters and see how they went from strangers to falling in love, and then you look at Yotsuba, who lacks all of that build up. I know people like to pick a scene and say, oh, but she didn't have any build up. Mystery build up? Yes. Romance? No. They're not the same thing. And on the same topic, I want to talk a bit about fate and love in Ichigo 100%. A manga Negi took inspiration from, even outright copied a couple of scenes, like Ichika kissing Futaro on the bench. A very nostalgic manga to me, but don't worry, I won't go crazy about any details. I'm going to spoil the ending though, so if this is something you want to read, be aware. In Ichigo 100%, there's a girl named Aya. She has fate on her side in every sense of the word. She's the girl from the premise of the manga, the one the protagonist is searching for, a reflection of him, has destiny backing her up, she is supposed to be the one. But there is another one, Nishino, who, even though has nothing on her side, pushes and pulls, gets involved into building a strong relationship with the protagonist. She supports him during his endeavors, advises him, forces him to face his problems, cheers him up, teaches him certain things, but doesn't allow herself to be fully dependent on him. Aya relies a lot on Junpei to the point where her whole character revolves around him. But she doesn't make moves, she doesn't act even when given the opportunity. Nishino, on the other hand, struck first, struck hard and struck often, and got the guy. She put in effort, fought for her love, and made the protagonist a better person. And that's how love works. Fated fairy tale endings are good, but a realistic approach is much better. That's the twist, so to say, of Ichigo 100. Fate can only do so much. Now, both Aya and Nishino had plenty of screen time, plenty of moments with the protagonist. The difference was that Aya had fate and hints on her side, while Nishino acted and kept at it. I guess my point with this is that we have to see the romance between 2 characters unfold before our eyes for it to have a believable and powerful impact. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's destined love or built love, all that matters is that we see it grow. But I'm really deviating from the topic, so let's end the video here.
Parkour!
In any case, these are my thoughts on this duality of Yotsuba and why I can't quite get behind her selfless portrayal. If you want to know Selfless, look at Ichigo for God's sake, she's all about that. I'm probably going to talk about it in her video, which won't come next because next is Miku. I've never properly dived into Miku's character before, but there's so much I want to talk about her, so look forward to that, Miku fans.
Hello, my name's Nino.